thank you for joining me in the South by Southwest Sydney Studio, Amy.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
Great to have you. Now, what are some common causes of workplace conflict?
There are lots, and I will say one of the most common is truly just misunderstanding. People speak past each other, they have different interpretations of something or different expectations around how people should behave or communicate. You know, one of the ones I hear most often about is, you know, someone wants to text or use Slack or instead of email or phone call, and it's just sometimes those simple miscommunications or misalignments, you know, around how we interact at work can turn into pretty big conflicts.
Yeah, they can, certainly. And that effect that it has on the workplace can be quite detrimental.
Yeah, I think, you know, I'm a big fan of the idea that conflict is actually good in the workplace, that we need some of it. The problem is we have such a negative attachment to it. So you have a miscommunication or misalignment over something small, and it can turn into what feels like a big fight, when really it's just takes a matter of moments to clarify. And then what happens, because we're so afraid of conflicts, is that we don't actually have the arguments about the things that matter, which is about the work. How do we produce the best product? How do we go to market with the idea? How do we partner with other organizations? And so because we are so afraid of conflict, we end up not having nearly enough, and we tend to shy away when the opportunity is actually there for a good fight.
Very true. And I'm curious, people's expectations is something you mentioned, and it's almost like people expect an office to run the way their household runs. Is that a common occurrence as well?
Yes. In fact, Esther Perel, who is, you know, relationship expert, a psychotherapist, talks about the fact that we all bring a relationship resume to work.
Very true.
Meaning we have these ideas, these expectations of how things should run. And it should run the way maybe we were raised, or the way we interact with our friends, or the way we interact with our family. And when everyone has a different resume, you have to spend some time negotiating those norms, those expectations, so that you can have healthy, productive conflicts.
And in relation to when a lot of people started working from home a few years ago, it was, I'm sure for some people, a bit of a utopia to be working from home and not have to deal with the office. Would there have that created a sense of less conflict because of the lack of proximity to co-workers?
There is some research that shows that when we are not co-located with our colleagues, that things tend to go more smoothly. We have less relationship conflicts, less interpersonal conflicts. However, we miss out on really what are the more productive conflicts, like task conflict, a disagreement over the objective or the goal, or process conflicts, how we're actually going to achieve something. So it probably felt better to a lot of people to be home, not having to see their coworkers, not having to read their body language, not having to smell their lunch, like all that stuff. But we end up in those situations in what Patrick Lencioni, who wrote the Five Dysfunctions of Teams, calls artificial harmony. So it feels like we're getting along, that things are easy, but there are unvoiced ideas, there are simmering resentments, there are opinions that don't get aired. And so it feels good, but you don't actually do good work.
I guess without being in that situation and having to deal with conflict face on, that's a skill that we lose.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's something, you know, I don't know about you, but no one ever sat me down when I was 14, 24 and said, here's how you have a good disagreement. So it's a skill we're already lacking. And then if we don't actually exercise it, it gets atrophied even more.
Absolutely. And can you share some of the strategies that you have for fostering a culture of open communication and debate within a team?
The single most important thing is to establish norms around disagreements. How will we handle when we don't see eye to eye? I tell the leaders who I coach or work with, you have to say over and over to your team, conflicts are a normal, inevitable part of interacting with other people. We will have conflicts. Conflict is normal. Say it to the point where they roll their eyes at you, because it requires getting over our natural human tendency to try to smooth things out, to focus on harmony, to focus on our relationship. So to get people to have those conflicts, you really have to set the expectation that this is what you want, this is what's good for the work, it's what's good for us as people. So that's one tactic. The other is to have a common language. You know, talk about what words are you going to use. When you say fight, we're going to have a fight. A lot of people are going to think, oh no, I can't do that, right? But decide, are you going to talk about disagreements, dissent, debate, right? Have norms like we're going to focus on the ideas, not the people, right? If I disagree with you, it's not about you as a person. It's about trying to produce the best ideas.
Yeah.
And so you really want to set those norms around what's normal, give people the language, and then reward them for doing it. So one of the problems with leaders is that we're often uncomfortable when a conflict comes up. Yeah. And so through our body language or through our words, we show this is not okay. So the more you can get comfortable, the more you can say, you know, I might be turning red in the face right now because I'm not that comfortable with conflict either, but this is an important conversation. Let's stick with it.
Yeah, and also I'm guessing not taking it personally. If it's for the good of the work, the good of the company, the good of the project.
Yeah. I mean, one of the biggest enemies of good leadership is ego. And the more ego we have invested in these disagreements, proving you're right, making things go smoothly, I think a lot of leaders they think that a sign of a good team is a sign of a conflict-free team, right? And that's not necessarily true. So if you can take your ego out of it and say, this is about the business, this is about the idea, this is about the product, the customer, the partnership, whatever it is, the better off you're going to be.
Absolutely. And your session, Embracing Healthy Conflict and Managing Tensions on Your Team, what's one key takeaway you hope attendees get from that?
Yeah, I think this is something I'm actually working on with my next book, is this idea that leaders need to have a relationship strategy. We think about resources, we think about strategy, we think about operations, we think about even are the right people in the right seats, right? Do we have the right talent? But we don't think about how do they work together? How do I, as a leader, make sure that I've laid the groundwork for them not only to get along, but also to have good, productive fights. So that's really what I want people to take away from this session is you need a relationship strategy for your team.
Excellent. And how do you think South by Southwest Sydney, how does that play a role in shaping the future of your field?
Well, one of the things about dealing with conflict at work is that I work across fields, across industries. And what I love about South by Southwest is that in a single day, I can talk to a quantum physicist, to a pro surfer, to a professor studying, gender and AI. And there's connections between all of our work. So I think what's amazing about South by Southwest Sydney is that we find those common threads, which pushes our thinking, no matter what field you're in, and it enriches the way that we do the work that we do.
It's interesting that you say that because I've chatted to many guests in the studio here, and it's amazing how I can draw connections to even my personal work and things like that, and guest to guest. And I would never have thought on paper that was possible.
Yeah, there were some sessions I went to yesterday simply because I was trying to support friends to see them. And I sat there and thought, oh, I know your work intimately, but actually hearing you talk about it here, I'm starting to see all of these connections between our work and others' work, and it's just so exciting. I mean, I was in my hotel room last night taking notes, furiously around what I learned, the connections I'm making, the things I want to explore, the new collaborations I want to see. So.
Fantastic. And one final question for you, Amy. How do you think South by Southwest Sydney can change the trajectory of someone's career or business?
I think back on my career, which I've been lucky, has been beyond my wildest dreams. And when I think about what's made the biggest difference, it's been people. And South by Southwest is always about connections, meeting new people, seeing new ideas brought to light. And so I think really for anyone, no matter what stage of your career you're at, it's about those connections. The conversation you have with someone in line, the person who actually is making your coffee that morning. Just those connections are things that help us see the world a little bit differently, and then therefore see ourselves differently and envision something different than what we expect for ourselves.
Fantastic. Well, Amy, I now believe in the Festivus tradition of airing of grievances. I will now do that everywhere, including the workplace.
Please do. But thank you for not doing it right now.
No, not right. But thank you so much for joining us here in the South by Southwest Sydney studio.
Thank you.
Thank you. And you can watch more videos at youtube.com/South by Southwest Sydney.